Hello again YouTube, and it's good to be back to the old recording setup and back to the old publishing schedule. So, quick update, I am still waiting on the big load of silver that I've ordered, so again I'm afraid I'm not in a position to show you them this week, but instead I've got the beginnings of something far more exciting to talk about. So, without further ado, what's in the purse this time? Modern coins. Let's take a little bit of a closer look, and I'll tell you what I'm thinking. So first up, apologies to those of you who I know are going to be in fits of agony over the imperfect arrangement of these coins, but I think this gives you kind of a good idea of what the modern shield back design on circulating UK currency looks like when you assemble them all together. So, why am I bothering showing you these? Well, I'm probably going to splice some images into the video here, but I've been thinking a bit lately about some of the YouTube channels out there that talk about making coin rings. And basically it looks like a lot of fun, and it makes some very, very pretty pieces. So what typically happens if you watch enough YouTube videos about something is eventually that that evil, wicked little part of your brain that comes up with the worst possible idea starts to go, I bet I could do that. And so I've decided to give it a go. So this is going to be the first of several videos, hopefully, looking at my forays into trying to make a coin ring. And basically I was discussing this with a friend and kind of said, well, ultimately maybe I'd like to kind of do it, with maybe a Britannia or kind of a nice, kind of big chunky steel coin, maybe even some gold if I was feeling particularly flush and adventurous. But they sort of said, yeah, but you want to practice on just like some tuppence pieces or something first, right? And I said, yes, of course, that makes perfect sense. Except it's not quite so simple, so I'm going to be having a little bit of a chat now about annealing and the composition of modern coins. So, first up, what is annealing? Annealing is basically somewhere that's a little bit between something being a solid and a liquid, but it's not quite melting. So metals are actually crystalline solids. People don't realise this because of their relative malleability and ductility, but there are basically crystal lattices at work in there. And so if you work a metal, if you you bend it, you twist it, you reshape it, what you're doing is you're introducing stresses internally, because the crystal wants to be a certain way, and the crystal wants to be a certain way, and you have made it be a different way, and that kind of breaks bonds, strains bonds. And so what that means is that you're actually kind of using up that sort of natural margin of malleability that you have. And what annealing does is annealing kind of takes, your solid metal, and it kind of allows all the atoms to jiggle about and fit into a more comfortable position. So it basically removes these internal stresses that you've built up by working it. The technical term for what this is doing is this is reducing the amount of Gibbs free energy in the structure. Why am I boring you with this? Well, annealing is a very important part of making a coin ring, because you're doing a lot of work on that metal in order to get it from a nice flat disc into a cylinder shape. Basically, anything that's non-ferrous, i.e. not steel or iron, you can anneal, and you can basically heat it up, remove the internal stresses, and then just plunk it in some water to quench it. Iron-based materials, particularly steels, are different, because steel isn't actually pure iron. It's an alloy using carbon, and it has a very complicated phase diagram. And basically it can form lots of different kinds of crystals. And the long and the short of it is that you can anneal steel by heating it up and then allowing it to cool slowly, but it's difficult to do. It's a bit harder to work with. Basically, if you quench it, then you basically actually harden it, and this is actually part of how swordsmiths in the Far East managed to develop the famous Uchigatana. Is they actually developed a technique for painting a paste of essentially clay onto a sword of varying thicknesses. And so when they quenched it, the sword would actually cool at different rates on different parts of the blade. So you quench the front of it very, very quickly, so you have a hard, very, very firm, very, very sharp cutting edge. But then the bits further back cool more slowly, so then you have kind of more of the flexibility, so it doesn't just shatter the first time you use it. Well, okay, you may think, but if you're planning on doing something with 2p pieces, that's fine, because they're coppers, right? Therefore, they're made of copper. No, it turns out not. In the early 1990s, because of the increasing value of copper compared to the face value of the coins, the 1p and 2p, the 1p and 2p coins, were replaced from what they were previously, which was a very copper-heavy version of bronze, so copper and a little bit of tin, to what they are nowadays, which is actually their copper-plated steel. And it's not stopped there. Since then, they have also done a similar thing with the 5p and 10p, the 5 and the 10. Are also nowadays nickel-plated steel. So the 20p and the 50p are still cupra nickel, which means that they're still, kind of soft and annealable, and you can probably work with them. But you're probably spotting a bit of a problem here, and that's that they're not round, and whilst I may be tempted to have an experiment with that at some point, looking at them as they are, it's a case of actually I don't want to be messing around with that kind of thing for my first time. So, present day coins probably not going to work. But what I do have is a nice big jar of coins, from which I was able to liberate a surprisingly large stack of old bronze 2p pieces. And all these old ones have got this beautiful sort of peacock feather design on the back, which I actually really quite like. I think could make actually for a very, very fetching coin. Except that there is one minor drawback. And that is in the shape of the UK Coinage Act 1971. The same is probably true in many countries, but there are basically laws against you defacing the coin of the realm. This is done for kind of quite obvious reasons. One, it's a very important, kind of statement of the state's authority, so they don't want you messing around too much with that. And two, it's basically to prevent fraud as well, because if you take a coin and change how it looks, maybe you can try and pass off a coin that was for one value and try and pass it off as one for a different value. Say, maybe if you took, say, a 2p coin and you electroplated it with some nickel, kind of scraped off the 2 and put a 10, and then tried to, pass it off to somebody as a 10p coin, for example. And what the law forbids, it forbids the melting down or the breaking up of coins. Explicitly, that's what it says in the UK law. So melting down, that means that I'm not allowed to melt these down in order to get, kind of the slightly higher value of the copper and the tin compared to the face value of the coins. And presumably breaking it up would mean that the typical approach for making a coin ring, i.e. Punching out a circle in the middle and then working the shape, would probably also be illegal by that definition. So this gets into an interesting grey area, because this is sort of one of those laws where it's there, it's on the statute books. So the question is, if I were to do that, am I realistically putting myself at risk of prosecution? And that could be up to a £400 fine and up to 2 years in prison. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I think that sending somebody to prison for 2 years for making a ring out of a 2p piece is a bit much. I think, realistically, it's unlikely that I'd get in trouble for doing so. And in fact, actually, if you go and you look on Etsy, you can find there are other people out there already making coin rings out of UK coinage. So realistically, I think it's one of those laws that's kind of there, but nobody actively enforces it. But when it comes to making YouTube videos, there is this tiny bit of me thinks, is it entirely sensible to do a very explicit documentation of me doing something that maybe I shouldn't be doing? However, there is a potential other option in the form of our friends on the continent. I am, of course, referring to the Eurozone and the Eurocoins themselves. So, most of the lower denominations, so 5 cents, 10 euro cents, 50 euro cents, are made with what's known slightly ironically as German gold, which is actually kind of a brassy material, so it's very, very similar to copper and nickel. It's mostly copper based, with a couple of other alloys in there, so I think actually in terms of being workable, it will probably work just about as well as the bronze 2 pence pieces I was looking at. But what's really interesting, because I know what you're thinking, you're going to be thinking, oh yeah, that's a good idea, just use a foreign coin, then you won't get in trouble with your government, right? But it gets better than that. EU law explicitly states that governments, whilst they're not allowed to encourage it, they explicitly have to tolerate a certain amount of defacing of currency for artistic and creative purposes. So they actually have it, kind of written in their laws that this is okay to do as long as you're doing it on a relatively small scale. So what I may possibly do, in particular for the purposes of these videos and for kind of practicing getting my eye in, is I may practice doing this with some euro coins. Specifically, I'm thinking of 50 euro cent pieces. Last bit of the update for now is I'm just going to show you some of the tools that I've been getting through the post over the last few days. Now, I'll be doing like a full rundown of what tools I've got and how I'm planning on doing this in a later video once they've all arrived and I actually get cracking on this. But, I'm going to show you these bits for now anyway because, they're fun and I want to show them off. And I've been getting some very weird looks in the office when these parcels have been arriving. So first up, I'm a man of few vices, but it's always worth picking up another one, so this will, I think, have multiple uses and make everything a lot easier to do. This is a curious little one because it's, kind of a hobby vice that assumes that you don't have, kind of a dedicated workbench to bolt stuff to, so you can kind of clamp it to your kitchen table and then have things gripped in there. And actually, this being quite small, it's probably just about right for doing things with small coins rather than being kind of a great big huge hulking thing. And secondly, what I've had arrive is a blowtorch. So this is just a simple butane one. Fortunately, because I'm not really looking at doing silver melting or silver pouring at this point, I don't have to worry about getting anything hot enough to actually melt it. I just need to get it warm enough to anneal, and that's a much, much easier thing to achieve. And of course, to go with that, I also had arrive through the post a not at all suspicious collection of butane canisters. So, my guess is by the end of this, I'm going to be on a lot of government watch lists. So, here's hoping it's worthwhile. So here we are. This is my video one, part one, of Pan looking at interesting ways to get arrested in 2018. Feel free to wish me luck in the comments below. Bye for now.